Well, good evening. How are you all doing? I know you had a long day, so, I think we all need one thing that we can take away with us. And so during the networking time, I met this interesting doctor called Nitin. Nitin, can you stand up? Well, take a good look at him. So he told me something that I remember. He said, as we all get older, we get big bellies and we get pregnant. But the only difference is we don't deliver. And so he said, so he has a totally flat belly now. And I said, how do you do that? He said, well, we all make time for everything except for ourselves. So, health is wealth. And so I think we all need to have him as a role model. Give him a big hand. I was thinking of what should I talk about? And I think let me talk about shared prosperity, right? Prosperity is what we all understand in this room because we're all beneficiaries of it. All of our lives have changed tremendously over the last few decades, and all because of innovation, entrepreneurship, technological advances, and so on. So, people who are smart, people who can leverage access to capital, people who can access globalization, everything else, have benefited quite a bit. And I'm a beneficiary of that as well. I came from India in 1973, did my master's, taught for a year, got a PhD, taught for a little bit, and then sort of became an entrepreneur, did a whole bunch of companies. So our philanthropic journey started about 15 years ago in 2000. And the first thing we wanted to do was to see if we could make more opportunities available like the ones we had in US, because I live in Boston. And so I and Jayshree, my wife, we said, well, how can we create more opportunities like the ones we had for more people within US? And the opportunities that we had in 70s and 80s, most of the technologies, core ideas came from places like Bell Labs. By the year 2000, places like Bell Labs were dead, even IBM. Because with globalization, companies cannot afford to do basic research anymore. So the center of gravity for ideas, idea generation, had clearly moved back to universities. So I joined the board of MIT in year 2000. And so, MIT, Stanford, Caltech already do as good a job as anybody else in the world in terms of coming up with ideas that make a difference in the world and create opportunities for people to start these companies. So we said, well, is there something more we could be doing? Because US spends about $50 billion a year, every year, in terms of funding new ideas in universities. And what happens is that, you cannot mandate innovation. You cannot say, you shall innovate, right? You have to create a nurturing environment. And every time you create a nurturing environment, even though people have a deep desire for impact with their ideas, over the course of time, the think tanks, the nurturing ideas, the community moves further and further away from the real world and becomes clubby. And when it becomes clubby, they all get more into impressing each other rather than the impact. So the ideas will not have the impact unless there is a very conscious way to connect thinkers to the marketplace or the real problems of the world. So an idea could be a great idea, but it doesn't have an impact unless it's directed to some burning problem in the world. So the first thing we did was we started this center in MIT, a Center for Technological Innovation. And the whole idea behind that was pretty simple. It was innovation plus relevance is equal to impact. So how do you bring relevance to an idea? That is, as opposed to people coming up with the whole idea and then looking for ways to use that idea to make this a better world, is there a way you can think about the impact that you want to have as you bake the idea so that when the idea is baked, it has a bigger pull in the marketplace, in the bigger pull in the world for whatever you want to do with it. So that was sort of the starting point for our philanthropy. And within about 3-4 years, it started looking very good. There was a huge impact in the way MIT researchers thought about things and the educational courses, everything else. And then we said, well, what can we do about this in India? And that's when Nishit started. He was the founding executive director for the foundation, and this was about 2005 or so. And so we said, what can we do about this in India? And both I and my wife, we both went to IIT Madras, and we're already doing a lot of stuff there. So we thought maybe we'll do Technological Innovation Center, similar to the Deshpande Center for Technological Innovation we have at MIT, maybe duplicate the same thing in IIT Madras. But then when we started looking at all the stuff in India, nanotechnology in India didn't sound that exciting. So we said, instead of doing technological innovation, let's do social innovation. And for social innovation, that equation actually gets turned around. It's really relevance plus innovation is equal to impact. Meaning, if you want to cause social innovation, the core competence actually starts with the true understanding of the problem itself. It's not the idea. It's the true understanding of the problem itself. And the new idea that you bring to solve the problem does not have to be patentable, does not have to be first time in the world, and does not have to be hugely competitive. It really has to be really a solution that's most relevant for the people who need it, right? So it's a slightly different bent on it. So to actually implement this idea, we came up with this idea called the Social Innovation Sandbox, where it's a little bit like Silicon Valley, Route 128 in Boston for social entrepreneurship. And so we took about 5 districts in north of Karnataka, near Bangalore, which is where we came from, so it was easy to get things going there. And so it's about 10 million people. So, it's large enough to have all kinds of issues, cities, small villages, and so on. But at the same time, small enough to create a critical mass. So we started a center there, and what I want to talk about is that difference between that social innovation and technological innovation. So we've had over 100 plus 150 or so people, young men and women from US who have gone there and spent time and so on. But very earlier on, we realized that local leadership is the most important thing for this thing. People from outside can only be a catalyst. They cannot be the people who cause the social change. So we came up with a lot of these local leadership programs. For example, we have a program where 4 college kids come together, pick a problem in the society and solve it. So now we have 10,000 kids running around in this small area doing all kinds of problems, solving all kinds of problems. So it just creates a lot of, just like Ajay was talking about Wadhwani Foundation, this entrepreneurship is all about learning how to unknot something to solve a problem. Meaning, there's a lot of problems in this world, and people could take 3 approaches. Number 1, they could walk around and not even see the problems. They could see the problems and then complain about them, which is what happens with most of the people in India, particularly if there are more than 50. Within 15 seconds, the conversation goes south, right? Because it's hard. And so immediately the conversation always goes to corruption and how everything is broken and nothing can be fixed and so on. But the third approach is to say, I become passionate about some problem, and every problem is deadlocked in this world because it's reached some stable state. There's some reason as to why things have to be the way they are, because it's deadlocked. So to unknot it and somehow change that and make it better, somebody has to become very passionate about something and unknot it, something that looks not possible, but you unknot it. When you do that, it doesn't matter whether the problem is small or big, it's a very empowering feeling. And when people experience that feeling, when they actually solve a problem, they get hooked on it. Once they get hooked on it, then your whole life changes, because that's what you want to do for the rest of your life. Every time you see a problem, you get all excited because it's an opportunity. So suddenly, instead of the world looking like a whole bunch of problems, it starts looking like a whole bunch of opportunities. And so giving people an opportunity to become passionate about something and unknotting a problem independent of what the problem is, whether it's small, big. And it's very interesting how when a professor gives a problem to solve, it becomes homework. When the kid picks a problem to solve on his own, it becomes an entrepreneurial opportunity. So giving people that opportunity to become passionate about something is the essence of this social innovation. And then we extend that out, and we train a lot of young men and women to be entrepreneurs and so on. But also, we are doing about 50 social interventions, and we try to do them the same way you do companies here, right? First, figure out what is the innovation, because in the nonprofit world, everybody tries to do everything, and then they can't do anything right. If you did that in business, you'll go bankrupt, right? So you say, tell me what is it that you're going to do that's different, and then we'll fund that innovation, which is like a seed money. It may fail. You don't know, because innovation always means risk. But the only secret is to fail small. If it works, the organization has to be prepared to scale it. And you scale every intervention by one of the three ways, right? Either a free market economy. Some interventions lend themselves to a free market economy where the value that you bring to the customer is he can pay for it and it becomes self-sustaining and you can grow it. Or you bring innovation to the government program, because government is the organization that spends the most amount of money, and therefore if you can bring innovation to what they do, it's a big plus. Or charity, but a very broad-based charity where everybody is participating and it's not just a few people writing a very big check, because that's not sustainable. Or a combination of the three. And so what we do is we do sort of this seed investing, and maybe we may do Series A in the venture capital jargon. But over the course of time, the organizations have to find their own thing. And so out of the 50 organizations, quite a few of them have scaled quite a bit. Akshay Patra is now pretty large. Agastya, which teaches science to rural children, is up to 1 million children a year now. And a lot of programs. So the programs fall in all kinds of categories. Some of them are agriculture, some are livelihood, health, education. So they're all, it's not really, we don't really go there and say, this is what's good for you, so please do this. It's more like, can you find a group of people who are really passionate about solving a problem? And do we really see the capability of their ability to solve the problem? If they do, then just help them get them on their feet, and then they take it over and run the whole thing. And if you're interested, we can talk about how each of these organizations have grown quite a bit, and what are sort of the learnings there. And then about 4 years ago, originally we thought US needs technological innovation, India needs social innovation. And then we realized that India needs technological innovation because India still needs to build a lot of infrastructure, needs to build power and roads and all kinds of stuff. So India needs technological innovation, but also the US needs social innovation. Because in US, it's the same thing. There's no shared part of the prosperity, right? I mean, there's a lot of prosperity, but the shared part of it is sort of getting lost. So we brought this social innovation sandbox to Massachusetts. And so we've been at it now for the last 4 years, and we just branded that program as E for All, which stands for Entrepreneurship for All, and we're hoping we can duplicate it across all of US. So there is about 250 economically depressed places in US. I'm sure every city has a part of the town which is economically depressed. And so the old economic development model in US was, and it still is to go to these places, build infrastructure, invite big companies, and then hopefully they'll come and hire people. That isn't happening anymore. So we somehow have to get people within these communities to get up and go. They have to become entrepreneurial. So in this Lowell, Lawrence is a textile town in Massachusetts, which used to be the textile headquarters of the world. If you go there, you'll see miles and miles of these textile mills, which are all abandoned, 40% unemployment. It's the 40th poorest town in the United States, in spite of being right next to MIT and Harvard and all these great places. And so we started a program there. So last year, we had 1,000 people participate in the pitch contest. So the starting point for these people is not like venture capital, business plan, everything else. You just go there and say, hey, do you have a passion? Do you have an idea? And we did this pitch contest in Spanish and English and whatever people feel comfortable with. And then every 6 months, we run this accelerator program where we pick about 15, 20 of them and run a 12-week program. We have about 120 mentors, like the people in this room, who all come and help out these people. And so in the last 18 months, we've done 60 of them. More than 50 of them are up and running. So these companies are not necessarily the high-tech, high-growth companies, but they're organizations which are for-profit, non-profit. Some are high-tech, some are low-tech. Some of them can grow. Some of them are just lifestyle. So it's pretty fascinating as to how doesn't matter whether it's the lower part of the economy or the most developed economy. Getting people to be excited about ideas, getting people to be excited about what they're doing, and taking that initiative to make things happen seems to be the way to really bridge this gap of this shared prosperity. But you have to do it a little differently. And so a lot of the nonprofits and the for-profits. So let me talk a little bit about what is the difference that I've found between the two sides. So if you look at the for-profit and if you look at the nonprofit, in both the sectors, things get started because there is some crazy person, some entrepreneur, right, who gets things going. And everybody says, don't do it, and he'll still do it. On the for-profit side, on the non-profit side, the person has to be 100 times more crazier because it's so much harder on the non-profit side because there's no resources, there's nothing, right? But on the for-profit side, what happens is that it doesn't matter how crazy you are, within a year or 2 years or at most 3 years, you have to find a sweet spot where somebody is willing to pay you something for what you're doing. So as a result, there is sort of a natural feedback loop where the customer sort of drives you in a certain way so that it directs you to a point where you're being useful to somebody. If you don't find a sweet spot, you're out of business, right? So you get flushed out. So in some ways, in the for-profit model, there is sort of this self-regulating mechanism where if you're doing something that people don't really want, you don't get to do it for very long. And even after you get going, the competition is so intense that it's not enough to do just one thing. You have to do 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, 4.0. You have to compete every day, right? So execution excellence is absolutely given in the for-profit sector. But the for-profit sector can lose, in chasing the top line and the bottom line, can lose their compassion. They can lose concern for the people, for environment, can mess a lot of things up and everything else. So in the for-profit sector, what you have is execution excellence, but sometimes you may lose the compassion. On the non-profit side, you absolutely have the compassion because nobody starts non-profits without having that compassion for people they want to help. But unfortunately, most of the time in the non-profit sector, the people that you're trying to help don't have the ability to pay. And therefore, you don't have that natural feedback loop. Whatever you give, they have to take, right? And therefore, slowly, because of the pressure over the course of time, a lot of the nonprofit organizations tend to cater more to their donors than they do to the people they help. And therefore, what you do, everything has to please the donors more than they have to please the people you help. In fact, you can see that in US. US is the worst culprit of that because if you look at a lot of the interventions that you have in US, everything gets gold-plated, right? Every intervention is gold-plated because the donor may have been poor at one point, but now they're rich. And the risk tolerance is very different. So when some organization goes there and says, well, you know, we take the kids to school in this Toyota Corolla, the donor will say, no, 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 you should at least have a Lexus, right? Because that's what he drives in, right? So the donors have a very different risk tolerance than the people you're trying to benefit. So when the donors start driving the whole intervention and the product gets out of control. And so co-creating the solution, somehow bringing that feedback loop into the system is very important. And co-creating the solution with the people who need it at a cost point that you need it is very important. And that's the innovation that's happening better in India than anywhere else in the world. Because in India, you have three things that have come together. Number one, there is talent there and confidence, which the country did not have. When I left India in 1973, there was really not that much either technology or confidence. In fact, from IIT Madras, I graduated in computer science. I'd never seen a computer in my life. And so the way we learned computer programming was, those days it used to be like Fortran. So the professor would say, oh, write a program to do this. And we would write the whole program and give it to him. He would say syntax error and give it back to us. So he was our computer, right? So that was a huge difference between the capabilities of the rest of the world with what India had. But now, there is about 1% of the population, which is a huge number, which is 10, 15 million people, who are second to none to anybody in this room, whether it's engineering or medicine or finance or management or you take anything. I mean, globally, they're very competitive. So you have a lot of global talent. So you have that execution excellence. Secondly, you have the huge problem staring right in front of your eyes. Millions of people who cannot read and write, people living in slums, the healthcare. The problems are right in front of your eyes. And the third piece is the freedom to do whatever you want to do, unlike China. In China, if you want to start a school or a nonprofit or something, it'll take you forever. You can't do that because the government won't allow you to. So the fact that you have the execution excellence, you have the big problems right in front of your eyes, and you have the freedom to do things. India, as we have heard, whether it's Ekal Vidyalay or Akshay Patra or Pratham or what Ajay is doing, a lot of these programs, I mean, in terms of the necessity of the country is to come up with these low-cost solutions that can scale. And so scalable, low-cost solutions will come from India. And when that happens, you're actually bringing a lot of hope. You're bringing a lot of hope to these people that never had anything before. And so, in some ways in India, even though the people are very poor, there is that hope, which is the real national asset, right? Because once people lose hope, there's nothing you can do. There's nothing to negotiate. When somebody says, I've lost hope and I'm ready to kill myself, what do you negotiate with that person? Nothing. And that's what's happening in quite a bit of the world. So India can actually be a beacon of hope to change that whole thing in the entire world. And I think all of you are a part of it. So that is, we can all be catalyst to what's happening in India. We can provide the financial support. We can provide the intellectual capital that you have. And I know a lot of the questions were, how can you all help? You can all help with your execution excellence. When you go to India, you can sort of bring the same level of expertise and raise the expectations of these organizations to perform the same way that you do in your job every day. And so if you can bring that execution excellence to the compassion of the nonprofit and hopefully bring some of that compassion to the for-profit world, I'm sure we can make this a better world. Thank you. Sure. Yeah, I can answer some questions if we have any. I know it's been a long day. Yes?
Desh, one of the things I find is people sitting here have at least spent 15, 20, 25, 30 years in US. And when they go back to India or whichever country they've come from, they lose the adaptability. So the first thing they start comparing the context of, I cannot do this because it's not like US.
Yeah.
How did you overcome that transition? Or you never had that? I do
No.
not know.
No, I think it's very, okay. So the question is, most of the people who live here, they're used to executing in a certain way, certain level of excellence. When they go back to India, they find it very difficult to sort of impose the same standards. In fact, each one of us is very compassionate about these problems and we want to help. And when we want to help, we always say, what is it that I can give to the world? That's the biggest mistake that US is making. In fact, if you look at the amount of money that we put in Africa, a typical, what happens is somebody goes there, some agriculture expert goes there and says, if only we put $10 million a year and bring all the modern technology, we can change things. They put all that stuff, $10 million a year for 10 years. At the end of it, they get fed up and they leave. When they leave, those people are worse off than they were, because neither they have the new, nor do they have the old. So I think the way you want to think about this is that if you leave them alone, that's no good, because you have to change, right? So it's really finding the right knob for assimilation and innovation. That is, if you go all the way to the one end of the spectrum and say, I'm going to innovate, I'm going to bring the best iPad app to change the whole thing, or healthcare, or education, or whatever, that won't happen, right? So it's almost like if you want to have an impact, you have to assimilate first. You have to understand what the real problems are. That's why I was saying we should not lead with innovation. We should lead with relevance. And you should get those people to be innovative. Let them first understand what learning is all about, and then slowly let them mature to the point. So you just become an enabler to them. So as opposed to being the innovator, make them into innovators, and when they embrace the idea, and they'll come up with lots of great ideas. You know, poor people are probably the most innovative people, because when they have resources that are so little, they are better at it than anybody else. In fact, we run a program called Navodyomi, which is sort of for small businesses, right? So these guys, they're all like 10,000, 20,000 rupees a month, so very small businesses. But they understand two things better than anybody else. One is they know how to take pain, because they deal with it every day, and they know how to start solving problems with what they have, right? Which is just the opposite of what we try to do here with all the MBA students. The MBA students have all the skills, but they can't take pain, and whenever you give them a problem to solve, they start with strategy. They say, let me tell you everything I need to solve this problem, and if you give me everything, maybe I'll start, right? And then we try to push them into entrepreneurship. So these guys are born entrepreneurs, born innovators in some ways. So if we just give them a little bit of that skill, so we run a program called the MBA 101 for these guys, a boot camp. And it's amazing to see how quickly, not all of them can really rise up to the thing, but how quickly they can actually latch onto these things. So, but they will innovate in a slightly different way. In fact, we do this program. So the MIT thing we do, it's big ideas, the ideas that the world has never seen before, impacting the world. But most of the impact is really for the developed economy. And the developed economy has access to capital, you know, have customers who can pay money for the interventions. So as long as you come up with a solution that somebody wants, the company will work. The social innovation sandbox in India, whether it's Ekal or Akshay Patra, Pratham, all these things, it's not like patented, first time in the world, very complex ideas, but executing the hell out of it. It's pure, sheer execution that makes them all work. But there is a huge, you know, it doesn't matter which campus you go to here, which companies you go to, there's a huge desire on the part of people to have some impact on India and Africa and all these places. So the sort of the challenge is, how do you have these complex people who can think of complex things have an impact on developing economy? So Ratan Tata, who works closely with the sandbox, he just gave $50 million to MIT. And so MIT gives out about 50 Tata Fellows. So these are all students at MIT who do their masters and PhD and so on. And they are supposed to do all the work at MIT in Cambridge, Massachusetts, but have an impact on India. So we just had them all in this sandbox in India and trying to come up with a program. So what happens is they go two extremes. On one extreme, they go directly to people who live on $2 a day and say, let me see how I can help. But the guy who lives on $2 a day, his problems are so simple that no solution is worthy of a PhD at MIT, right? And then on the other hand, there's a lot of profs at MIT who imagine a problem and they go ahead and solve the whole problem, and then they're so disappointed that it has no impact, right? So the in-between thing that we're trying to connect is connect people at MIT to people in India who are already solving problems have scaled it to 10,000, a million, or whatever. So let's say if somebody is already supplying clean water to 1 million people. Now to scale from 1 million to 100 million, the problems are complex. There's complex technology, complex financial systems, and everything else. So if they can solve those problems, then there is a good chance that it can have an impact. A good example would be Jaipur Foot. How many of you know Jaipur Foot? Okay, for those of you who don't know, Jaipur Foot does these, for amputees, they provide artificial limbs. Very simple, very low cost, effective solution for millions of people. But the solution they provide, the ankle is fixed. And they don't have a solution for above the knee amputees. So you need a solution where you can have an ankle that sort of is flexible, and you need a solution for above the knee amputees where it's cheap, but also culturally acceptable, where people can squat on the floor and so on. Now that's a complex problem. Now that's worthy of a PhD at MIT if you can solve it. So if they solve the problem, you can see how that can have an impact. So I think you have to find the right recipient on the other side who can absorb your ideas that are a little bit more complex. So for example, how many of you know Akshay Patra? Okay, for those of you who don't know, it's an organization in India that said, well, a lot of children come hungry to school, can we help? So they decided to build a kitchen using advanced engineering, supply chain, procurement, accounting, all the good stuff. And they make these meals. So each of these kitchens make 150 to 200,000 meals a day, right? It's local cuisine, local produce, food that children really love. It changes from different parts of India. 12 cents a meal, $30 feeds a child for the whole year. We've been scaling it. We are doing 1.4 million meals every day now. In fact, President Clinton was so impressed by it. This was the 10th year anniversary of the Clinton Foundation. And so far, he has had 2,800 commitments, Clinton Global Initiative commitments. And he had to pick one to actually go and visit. And he picked Akshay Patra. So he invited me to go with him. So we were in Jaipur just a month ago to see the kitchen. And then we hung around for a whole week. We went to Vietnam and Banda Aceh in Indonesia and Australia and so on to see a lot of the initiatives that they do. But what's happening in India is definitely more impressive than what's happening anywhere else in the world in terms of coming up with these low-cost, scalable solutions. So now Akshay Patra, the guy who heads it, he's an IIT Bombay guy. Number 2 is a IISc gold medalist. They're all Swamijis, but they're intellectually very capable. So now they are great receptacles for any ideas that you give. So for example, Conagra, which is the largest food supplier in the world, right? There's $17 billion a year. Most of us, when we go to a grocery store and buy something, it's all probably Conagra. So about 10 nutrition experts and about another 8 food safety people from Conagra are helping us. Like they come and they look at the thing and say, okay, this is, because all the kitchens are ISO 9000 certified. And so they say, this is the safety procedures we would have followed if we were making this food. And so, but they have the ability to now absorb those things because it's a large organization, it has the capabilities and so on. So I think ability to build capability on the other side, to be able to absorb these ideas is what we all need to work on. So number 1, respect the ideas because they come up with ideas that are probably better than what any one of us can come up with. And secondly, continue to build that capability. So
I think there are more questions.
Okay.
I think we'll I'm sorry to do this. He took the hand mic.
Quick question, Desh. All these mini and micro innovations which are happening at the rural level, how do you capture these millions of innovations? One, to share them so that others are not spending time and energy solving the same problem, even at the micro level. And number 2, perhaps when you add all these micro innovations together, perhaps they are solving a much bigger problem.
So the way you scale the impact is by 2 models. Sometimes you can centralize the whole thing, like this Akshay Patra thing or ECAL, where you build a large organization and so on. Sometimes organizations can only be done with a small community, in which case you build a franchise model. It's a Dunkin' Donuts, Starbucks kind of a model. You perfect it in one place and you duplicate it in lots of other places. So in India, there's Honeybee, initiative in IM, Ahmedabad, and so on. So people are trying to capture those things. But where I feel we need to do more work is in really sort of inspiring that entrepreneurial thing. I think it's really people getting a taste of how you convert a problem into an opportunity. And once people, I'm sure we have a lot of entrepreneurs here, you become feverish about something, and then you just can't sleep until you solve the problem. So creating that feverishness to wanting to do something is probably the key asset that we need to develop, I think.
I think we have time for one last question, which I'm giving it to the nearest person, unfortunately.
Hi, Desh. We IITians have been doing a lot of things, and the non-IITians too. 15 years ago, the Indians in US were mostly focused on branding. We did a lot of branding through organizations like TIE, etc., Pan IIT, etc. Today, what I see this is excellent. Now we are doing something in philanthropy. And where would you like to see Indians in America? What activities they should be carrying out 10 years down the road? Where should our focus be?
I think what's really exciting about people of Indian origin is the second generation, is our kids. Number one, they are a lot broader than what we were. When we grew up, you either had to be an engineer, a doctor, a lawyer, or something, right? And that's it. Kids these days are so well-rounded, it's amazing. And what impresses me most about those people is their compassion to make this a better world. I think most of us were struggling just to make a living. Maybe it's Maslow's hierarchy, but the compassion that these kids have, whether it's Nish Acharya or anybody else, to actually make a big difference in the world is very, very exciting. And so I think all of us need to somehow encourage that and make people a little broader in their perspective. And also, I think there is a lot of learning that happens not by just doing things that are Indian. I think it's a global world. So we need to there's a lot of stuff that we can learn from US that can go to India. There's a lot of stuff that we can learn from India that can come back to US. In fact, Bridgespan is probably the biggest consulting organization, a nonprofit, which came out of Bain Consulting. So their partners have been working with us, doing a lot of stuff in India, trying to bring back some of the best practices from India back to US. Similarly, from US to India. For example, do I have another 2 or 3 minutes? Okay. So one of the big things that I feel proud about contributing to Akshay Patra was, about 6 years ago, I somehow believe that all the Indian philanthropies, people from here should only be a catalyst. And we should get them to sort of run their own organization, financially support their own organizations, and so on. And so their whole funding model was about 10 people writing 2-3 crore checks, big checks, and they used to run the whole thing. So, in US, fundraising is like a big business by itself. Like MIT alone has 150 people who raise money every, they're just like sales machine. They raise about $400 million a year, right? So I said, well, you need to start a fundraising organization. And they were shocked. They couldn't accept that. They said, well, when people give you money to feed a child, how could you use that money to print a brochure? Was like the biggest hang-up, right? So, here typically the fundraising cost is anywhere from 12% to 25%. So I said, okay, let's start a little bit. In fact, we will fund that. So we took it to 4%, 8%, and so on. Now, Akshay Patra is a $40 million a year program, 240 crores a year. Half of it comes from the government. And out of the remaining 20 mil, 80% of it is raised in India. Only a little bit comes from US and outside. And I'm hoping that ratio will tilt even more towards India, because it's amazing how the farmers, the teachers, the high-tech workers, everybody sort of contributes. So I think the more and more as we can sort of get the practices of philanthropy going both ways, because there isn't a natural feedback process that keeps them good. See, in the for-profit world, the globalization makes everybody work a little bit smarter, because what happens in China affects here, what happens here affects India, and everybody has to change their practices. If you don't, you die. In philanthropy, you don't have to. And so I think anything all of us can do to actually bring them all back together, I think together with us and our second generation would be a great thing. So, well, thank you, everybody. I think I really appreciate and thank. So let's give a big hand to Asif. Asif, where are you? For bringing us all together. I think this is a very important